Eruvin Daf, we begin on the second line of the top of the Yemen. We're in the middle of a discussion regarding an interesting case regarding a Hia Varnica, regarding a certain gazebo in the middle of an orchard. Hashir's corresponds because of Cheskel Torah anytime Daf Chaim was joining us for today's Daf. Some of the things we're going to be discussing in today's Daf is, like we said, there was a machlekes in practice regarding this house that opened up by the Resh Galusa into the orchard, and he had this gazebo with a tree over there, and he wanted to know if he could go ahead and eat food there on Shabbos, and someone made sticks, and Rava came and took it down. The Gemara continues explaining the machlekes of their opinions. And we then discuss from the halacha of the Mishnah regarding Rabbi Eliezer, how large an area Rabbi Eliezer allows one to carry, and there's actually machlekes regarding his opinion regarding an area that was enclosed for wasn't enclosed for residential purposes. How big does he allow that to be carried in? Additional machlekes is whether a person who forgot to contribute to an Eruv, if he has to mevatel his right in the chatzar, then there's exact machlekes regarding what exactly happens if that also automatically includes his house or that doesn't. And then another teaching Rabbi Eliezer said if regarding the vegetable that's for use as mar, if that includes what's called a krabban. Then some of the key terms and concepts we've been discussing in today's daf are what's called hukav said yashva. If an area is first surrounded, if it's first enclosed, and then is subsequently settled, what halacha that has, if that's considered as a hukav ladira for residential purposes or not. The concept of mevatel reshus chater, if someone nullifies the domain he has in the courtyard, if reshus basic batel ain't batel, does that include his house or not? Which is, as we'll discuss, that we're going to get later on in this Masech, regarding Eruvin Chatzeris, everyone has to be joined as if they're one house. Let's say one person forgot to join the Eruv, so he has to nullify his rights in the Chatzah, so it doesn't make it us of everyone else. Does that also include his house or not? Can everyone else carry from his house or not? His house is going to be off limit. So we begin the current daf, the second line down with Daf Yomi, which again we're in the middle of. We started the conversation yesterday. There's a Hiyam Varnica. We were going with the second interpretation of Rashi, which Rashi prefers. Is that it was this gazebo that Havalel Resh Galusa b'Bustani. The Resh Galusa had this gazebo area in his yard, and he wanted to carry food to that area on Shabbos. So Rav Huna Bachina, what he did was he held that they may not carry just in the area generally because it's hukum b'sei pasach. That here it was enclosed first and then subsequently was open. So that was called hukum. It's not for dira purposes, and therefore since it's bigger than Beis Hashem, you're not going to be able to carry over there. So what he did is that he made sticks less than 3 tvachim one from the other, so it's like loved. So this is a special path taking you from the house to that area. Now Rava removed the sticks. Now there's actually many different interpretations of Shloimy exactly what was Rava thinking. Places has a few, but initially one of the interpretations is he held that hukav b'seiv yashav is more than hukav b'seiv pasach, which is, although we had said in the previous daf that seems to be everyone agrees, and Rava also does a taste and proves that if you first enclose the area and then you open it to the house, that's not going to be valid because it wasn't enclosed for residential purposes. But that's if regarding making an opening. But let's say you create a settlement afterwards, which here this avarniki, this gazebo, which is for residential purposes, was done subsequently, that would actually still make these outer walls as if they're for residential purposes. Hukum b'sev yashav is more than hukum b'sev pasach. That's what one part of, at least they weren't sure if maybe that's where Rava was coming from. So now the Gemara continues that, and this is where the story was, because we said his students came, and they, after Rava, their Rebbe went and took down the sticks, they actually, like good students, took the sticks and ran away with it, so that Rav Huna doesn't come back and put it back up. Now, this is where the Gemara continues. L'machar, the next day, after they recalled, the students realized that this was wrong, what they had done, the next day, on Shabbos, they were Eser Eruvin l'Rava. Ravina asked to Rava the following question. This is regarding the laws of the Tchumen, which the Tchumen will also discuss, actually starting this daf, hopefully, regarding a person that has a Shabbos residence. The halach is you could go only 2,000 amas. Now, when you live in the city, it goes from the edge of the city. So the question is, where does the city end, especially if it's a walled city, to say that, how far can you walk from the edge of the city 2,000 amas? So the Brisa says like this, Ir Chadasha, a new city, Maiden La Miyushavasa. So you start measuring from the settlement. So in other words, if it was a walled city, but it wasn't totally settled yet. So now when you're coming to measure the tchum, you cannot measure from the wall, you have to measure from the houses. And the reason for this is because the wall is not really quote unquote a wall to make the whole city like Dalad Amas. Why? Because this is what the Mishnah, the Bryce is calling it Ir Chadasha, a new city, meaning it was just recently settled, as the Bryce will explain what that exactly is. Now, V'yishana, an old city, quote unquote, Nichemasa, you measure from the wall. So the Bryce says, Eze Chadasha, Eze Yishana. What's a new city? What's an old city? Chadasha, a new city, means Shehukful B'sayv Yashva. It was first walled in, and then only then did they settle the area. So therefore the wall was there before it was settled. So therefore, that's why, meaning, let's say, not everyone moved in yet, that's why we're calling it like Ir Chadasha. So that's not going to be able to measure from the wall, because again, that wall wasn't a walling for residential because no one was in there yet. So it was walled, and only then they settled. Oh, so then you can't measure from the wall. You're going to have to measure from the houses by Ir Chadasha. What does it mean? Yeshana, an old city, means Yashva. People had been settled there for a long time. Well, and then only subsequently did they wall it in. Oh, so that's what we mean, that when we mean the old city, we mean the settlement was old, and that was before the wall was put up. Then you're going to measure from the wall. That's what the Brisa says. So that says Ravina to Rava v'hainami. So this bustina, this garden is the same thing. It's like it was walled and then subsequently settled, because as Rashi explains, again, in case you're following Rashi, some people do that with that track. Now I'm back on the bottom again, because that's what the Rashi second interpretation is. So before they planted the trees by the case of the Avarniki, they would first surround the area, and only after that, when the tree grew, then they made the Avarnika, then they made the gazebo area all around it. So therefore, that what Ravina was saying, Rav Huna Bachina did very good, because you're going to have to go ahead and make a new hekef of these sticks, because this is like hukov ulub saif yashav, which is essentially what he was saying is even regarding yashva. And the Taisa says that, not to confuse anyone, but there's three questions the students were asking on Rava. The first question was asking on, they weren't sure why was Rava saying that you don't need these sticks. Was it because he held that this fence is good, or because this fence is good? Was he going with the hekif of the whole bustana, or was he going with the hekif of the avarniki? So the first question is asking on this outer area. That even Hukuk B'Sab Yashav, you see, now forget about the Hukuk B'Sab Pesach. Everyone agrees that's not going to be good, because you had fenced it in before anyone was even there, where any residence was there. For sure that's not going to work. You have to have Pesach B'Sab Hukuk. But even Hukuk B'Sab Yashva, which is then you settle it subsequently, you see from this Brisa that that's not considered as enclosing residential area. So this outer fence, they were saying, is not going to work. And therefore, that's one difficulty, even if you're going with the outer walls. Now the next two questions are asking on the walls of the varniki, of the gazebo, that itself should not make it into a residential area, because only Rav Papa the Rabbi, he was one of the two students that previously had done like the Rebbe and taken away the sticks. The next day he asked on Rava from the following teaching. But Ravasi said, mechitzis adruchol, are the walls that the construction people that they make for shade all around them when they're building walls. So the halach is leishma mechitza. It's not considered as a valid mechitza, as a wall. So alma, you see, since it's being done simply for privacy, and tomorrow they're going to take it down. So lav mechitza is not considered as a mechitza. It's not significant at all. So chanami here also by the varniki, since the walls of the gazebo itself is just there for privacy during the day and nighttime, you're doing it, but no one's living over there. Lo have a mechitza, it's not going to be considered as a mechitza, and therefore you cannot say that should make the area into a residential area. In other words, like we said, they weren't sure it was the outer wall, like the first question they asked, around the whole garden, or was it the wall of the varniki, because if that can make the whole area residential, from the fact that this is a house, so to speak, inside, and they're saying it's not a house, it's not a residential thing, it's just where people do private things, but no one's living over there, and therefore that should not make the whole area residential. Third question they ask, also the second student that had taken away the sticks, he says, but when this is mechitza sud lenachas, if you have walls that are made for storage, not to live over there, just to protect certain things, what you want to keep over there. So leishma mechitza, that's not considered as a partition, as a wall. The Rabbi Baravua, he brings an interesting raya. He was ma'arav la l'kula mechuzah, and then we'll go with Rashi's interpretation. He made an eruv on the whole mechuzah, which is one of the cities in Babel. Arsiyasa. What this means to say is that he made every single neighborhood a separate eruv, and in every neighborhood there were many alleyways. And what he didn't do was he didn't make a citywide eruv. Now, as Rashi points out, and again this is the way Rashi says it, even though it was a small city, meaning that there was not 600,000 people every day in that city, and the Mishnah teaches later on of Netesim and Aleph, which we'll discuss at great length, these halachas over there, when you have what's called the Ir Shal Yachid, you could make an eruv on the whole city, and the Ir Shal Yachid means to say, if it's not similar to when the Jews were in the desert, and that's 600,000 people, so you technically could make a citywide Erev. He didn't make a citywide Erev, he only made every neighborhood separately. Why? Mishum Peri de Beituri, because of the fruit of the oxen, meaning because of Peri actually means the ditches, there were these deep ditches. Some Rashis have this picture. There was these deep ditches between every single neighborhood, which is sometimes hard to figure out the pictures Rashis have. And over there, that's where they put the pits of dates, which were for the oxen to eat. Now, the city itself didn't have a wall, but the alleyways themselves of every neighborhood was open to the Rishus Harabim straight through from one side to the other side. And they did make mechitzas, however, for the ends of the alleyways for every side at the outside of the city. So seemingly, there were mechitzas all around, so technically you could have made an Erev throughout the whole city, because you have the walls that you made for the mavlis, which ended at the outside of the city. But those walls were to protect the seeds, and therefore they weren't considered as mechitzah, meaning it was for the pits of what the oxen were eating. Therefore, that's not considered as a valid mechitzah to join together the mavlis to make them all one city, even though it was a valid wall. These were walls that were there. They were permanent walls. So it says, on that says Rav Huna to Rava, V'peri de Beituri. Now those ditches of the oxen where they kept the date pits, those were like walls which were made for storage, and therefore you see it was not a valid mechitza. So here also the walls that Rav Huna was making with Resh Galusa, that those walls he's asking that those areas of Avarniki, where people would put their talis over there, and they would just keep stuff over there, and all the other things. That was one of the purposes of the gazebo. So it's like a sui lenachas. So therefore, that's not going to be considered as shema mechitza. So that was the second question, that you see that varniki itself, the gazebo, cannot be considered as a mechitza to make it that these are walls, and now which was for a hekef of a dira, because they're not going to be considered as walls, because either it's made litzniusa or it's made for lanachas, and those are not considered as valid walls. So those were the three questions that we had asked regarding. The first question was saying the outer walls of the garden is not going to be good, because even hukafel was said yashva. Now forget hukafel was said pascha. Hukafel said yashva is not valid, and then the walls of the gazebo itself also cannot make it residential, because it's either for privacy or for storage purposes. But it's not. No one lives over there, so that can't make it residential. So that says the Gemara that, so Kari Allahi Resh Galusa, the Resh Galusa, who it was his house, he wanted to make the Kiddush over there in the gazebo. He said under a Papa and Rabbi Yeshua, who yesterday on the Arab Shabbos, they didn't remember this questions that they had. And they took apart the mechitzas that Rav Huna Bachinna had made. Now on Shabbos, they become chachamim to make it forbidden on him, and to say, no, you can't carry here anymore on Shabbos. And yesterday didn't know, says he quoted a pasuk in Yirmi on them. It says, chachamim heimul lahara. They're sages to do bad, because yesterday they took apart the sticks. But today on Shabbos, to do good, they don't know. Right? So yesterday took apart the sticks thinking that you don't need it, and then now today they say that no, you can't use it, can't make the kiddush in the gazebo, because we already took apart the sticks, and you can't carry over there, because that's not going to make it into a residential area. Now we continue with the halacha of the Mishnah, that we had said in the Mishnah, Amr Belay. He said, Shemati Rabbi Elazar, he said, I heard from Rabbi Elazar, Vafila Beis Kur. Because in the Mishnah we had discussed what was the limitation of the halach of how big can you carry in the karfav. So on that he said, forget about Beis Hasayim. You could have it even as big as a Beis Kur, which is even 15 times bigger than we had said of a Beis Hasayim, even when Shalai Hukav Ladir wasn't enclosed for residential purposes. He says you can make it as big as you want. But he said a Beis Kur, which is 30 saw. Says Gemara Masnit. Now our Mishnah is Deloy Kechananya. It's not like Chananya, because the Tanya in the Brayso Chananya, he says that Afil Hiar Bam Sa. He says even if it's 40 sa, which is not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said a kur, which was only 30 sa. And why could you have 40 sa? It's Kisterat Yoshel Melech. It's like the lot that's behind the palace, which the kings would generally stroll over there. Which that's a karfaf over there. That was their garden. But you see that that's how they dwell, and therefore it makes sense to say that the karfaf could even be. And even if it's enclosed, quote unquote, for non-residential, meaning there's no house over there, that's what the rechava is like on the back of the house. Still, you could go ahead and that's going to be considered as a karfav, which even shalahuk of ladir you could carry over there, even if it's up to 40 sa. Which Rabbi Yechon explains that b'shneim, both of them, Rabbi Eloi and Chananya, Rabbi Eloi and our Mishnah, Chananya and this brayso, mikrei achador should actually both expounding their sources from the same pasuk. Shneim is the pasuk in Melachim Beis. It says Vayish Yishayahu. Yeshayahu didn't even get out to the middle courtyard, which was behind the palace of Chizkiyahu, as Rashi says, because if you think it's talking about the courtyard in front of the palace, then that should have said the Chitzayna, the outer one. When it's saying the middle one, is because it was behind his house. And it says, Ksiv ha'ir. The word written there in the pasuk says, El ha'ir ha'tichayna. It says the word city, but Karina Chatza, but we actually recited, we sometimes a word is written in the Torah and Tanakh one way, but our Messiah is we read it a different way. What it means to say is that even though this lot was as big as a city, we still call it a Chatzar, even though it was not enclosed for residential purposes. From here we learn Listarati Shel Melech regarding the enclosures of what the kings use, which is essentially Karf of Shlehukot Ladira. It's an enclosed area that's not for residential purposes. Shahai Kayars Beinonius, that was like medium-sized cities. That's why it's written in the pasuk Ha'ir, even though we read it the Chatzah. And therefore that's why Rabbi Elazar held that you could go ahead and carry even such a big karf, which says about Mike and what were they disagreeing about? These two different interpretations. Marsav, Rabbi Eloi held that Yoris Beinoni is what's considered a medium-sized city, having base kur. A medium-sized city is 30 saw, and that's where we learn up to shiur of a karf, up to a kur, like he said in the Mishnah. Marsav, B'chanani held mem saw, a medium-sized city is 40 saw, and therefore that's why he said it could be even 10 more saw. But again, they're both learning it from the same pasuk from Yeshayahu. Now, the Gemara parenthetically, once we introduced this pasuk, says V'Yeshayahu my boy Hasam. What was he doing over there in the lot behind the palace, which is not a way out? He was behind the palace. You got to go out the front way. Why was he there? So Rabbi Yochanan says because Malama comes to teach Shecholach Chizkiyahu. This was when he had a prophecy that he's liable to die. So Chizkiyahu HaMelech became sick. So Yeshayahu went behind his house, and he established a yeshiva of students learning Torah al Pischai by the opening of his house in the palace, so that the Malach HaMavos, the angel of death, should not have permission to get there and kill him. And from here we learn out a Talmudic scholar who gets sick, yeshiva al Pischai, that we make a yeshiva by the entryway of his house. Gemara says no, Valav Milsi, that's not true. Actually might come to incite the Satan, who's the Malach HaMavos, when he sees that they're provoking him, he's actually going to go even stronger to try to get that sick person, and therefore maybe Chizkiyahu was different, but a regular Talmid Chacham, you don't make yeshiva by his entryway. But one thing is that was where the source was from. If this halacha of a karf shlug ladira, could we have it 30 saw or even up to 40 saw from the same pasuk it's written ha'ir, but it's pronounced chatz. The next teaching was two teachings that Rabbi Eloi said I heard from Rabbi Elazar that no one agreed to him. First one was the one we just said, that you could even carry in the karf shlehukot ladira up till a kur. And Mechin Shalatim, and he says I also heard from him a second halacha. If you have the members of a courtyard, the way you have to do is you make an Eruvin, you put the box of matzahs in one place, and then everyone's considered in that domain. That's our house, and we're all really one big family. That's what we say in our community. We say we're one big family. That's it. It's not like and that's what it is. Now we're one big area. But let's say one guy didn't join. You always have that one guy. He's like, he forgot. He didn't do it intentionally. He didn't join in the area. Now it's not one big family. It's considered a common area, not a privately owned area. So then what he does is that he's mevatel his area on Shabbos. He can't go ahead and make an area anymore because he forgot to do it on Erev Shabbos. So the halach is aser, and then there was words from the Mishnah that we said so it's forbidden for him to carry from his house to the courtyard, but he had heard from Rabbi Elazar that everyone else could carry from his house to the courtyard, because as Rashi explains, the Mishnah most definitely is talking about, although it doesn't say that in the words of the Mishnah, when he subsequently at Shabbos is mevatel his rishus, that the rights that he has in the courtyard. Because if he doesn't nullify his rights in the courtyard, then actually, even in the courtyard itself, it's forbidden for everyone else to carry from their house to the courtyard, because, like we said, everyone then has their own houses, their own area. The courtyard is a common area, and his rights in the courtyard makes it forbidden on them. So what Rabbi Eloi is coming to tell us, if someone nullifies his rights in the courtyard, so now there's no one here that has more than a singular area because everyone has an area over here. What he's saying essentially is, he automatically is nullifying his rights in his house too. So he's becoming a guest by them. So therefore even his own house is becoming permitted to them. But he's forbidden to carry out of his own house to the courtyard. Now, although he's permitted to go ahead and carry in and out from their house to the courtyard, as the Gemara tells later on, Daf Samach Tesma Beis, that from their house he's permitted, and they're permitted to carry like any person who goes into his friend's courtyard. He's allowed to carry from his friend's house into his courtyard because one domain. Here also, even though he's mevatel his rishus, he's allowed to carry from their house to the courtyard, but from his own house, he's not allowed to carry out. And that is, we don't say that since he's nullifying his rights, so wait, his house should be like their house. No, because when he's carrying it from their house, if he's carrying in and out, so you could say he's like a regular guy, like a guest. But from his own house, if he's going to carry out of his own house, so it almost looks like he's taking back rights in his properties, and then he's going to make it forbidden for them to carry out, as the Mishnah teaches on in Perek Hadar, if someone gives his rights and then he subsequently carries out of his own house, whether deliberately by mistake, he's going to make it forbidden on them. So that's the halacha of Rabbi Lai, in the name of Rabbi Lazar, that he's not allowed to carry from his own house outside, but his own house was nullified. Not only the rights he has in the courtyard, but the rights in his own house were also nullified. They could carry out of his house and use his house, but he cannot. Now, on that, the Gemara asks what's not. But we learn the Mishnah later on in Perek Hadar and the Samach Tes on the base that says, Beisai, his house, Asur laheitzi lahachnes. No one could carry out or carry in from his house, Loi villahem, for him and for them. So that contradicts what we said in the Mishnah, that we said only he cannot carry out, but they could carry out. Here we see even they cannot carry out of his house. And that Rabbi Shloimy says Leikash is not difficult because it's actually a machlekes. You continue to tell me base. Our Mishnah, as we said, Rebbe Lezer, as Rebbe Lloyd was saying, I heard from Rebbe Lezer. But this that we're saying, that it's later on Perek Hadar, that's forbidden even for them, is going like the Rabbanim, because Rabbanim hold that no, even they cannot carry out of their house. So the Gemara concludes and says, so what's the foundation of the machlekes? Kishatim Tzalema, when you're going to look, you could say, it's like this. L'div Rebbe Eliezer, according to Rebbe Eliezer, if someone nullifies his rights in the courtyard. And again, the reason why he has to do that is because it has to be considered like there's a single owner or a single family. And everyone, although they're separate houses, they made it like with an Eruv, as if they're all one family. This guy didn't join the Eruv. He's like, it's going to make it in the common area. And we say you cannot carry from a single area to like a common area because you might get confused with like a Rosh Hashanah, which is generally why you always have to make a Eruv Chatzeres. So when he's nullifying his rights, I have nothing to do with this Chatz, I give it all rights. So now there's no one here that's another owner over here. Rishus Beisei Bittel, so he's automatically nullifying, even though he didn't say explicitly anything about his house, he's automatically including that he's nullifying his rights even in his own house. Because most definitely, as Rashi says, our Mishnah has to be talking about when he didn't specify. Because if he specified that he's nullifying his house, then Rebbe Lloyd should not have said, I looked around by all my colleagues and I didn't find anyone to agree what I'm saying, because everyone would agree if he's nullifying his house, that of course they could carry out from his house to the courtyard because he has no rights in his house. So obviously we're not saying that he did it explicitly, he didn't do it explicitly, but automatically it's included that yes, you nullify not only your rights in the courtyard, but also the rights to your own house. But Rabbanan, no, if someone nullifies his rights in his courtyard, Rishus basically didn't nullify the rights in his house. So therefore, they hold that no one can carry out of his house because his house is still his house. So that would be carrying out from one domain to another domain. So therefore, that wouldn't be permitted. So the Gemara says, Pshita, obviously this is what they're disagreeing about. Why do Rav Sheshet have to say Kishatim Tzalema when you're going to look and analyze? You'll see that this is what they're disagreeing about. Isn't this obvious? So Amar Rechava, he says, Anov, Rav Huna Barchin, the Targimina, he says, we translate, when Rav Sheshet said Kishatim Tzalema, what was it necessary for? It's very interesting what he was saying it's necessary for. It was to tell you that Leinitzrucha, it was actually telling you the Chiddush in the halachas, meaning this that Rabbanan say that other members cannot carry to and from his house is going to tell us the principle of Be'ein Ra Mavatal. That what you nullified is only what you nullified, you did not nullify anything else. So to Rabbi Eliezer, when he says other members may carry to and from the house, even though he didn't say anything about nullifying his rights to his house, it's telling us that although he only said the Chatzar, but Be'ein Yaf Mavatal is nullifying with a generous nullification. So essentially, it's going to tell us a chiddush from Rav Sheshet to analyze and to understand the reasoning of the principle of the machlekes. You're right, the actual machlekes, he wasn't teaching us anything regarding what we were talking about regarding the bias and the chatzah. But if you analyze the Yisoid HaDavar, the principle, you could learn out something else. L'chamisha shashurin b'chatzar echad. It's going to teach us regarding a case of when you have 5 people that are living in one courtyard. Now, one of the people forgot, and he didn't make an erev. Now, based on the principle we just said, you're going to understand why you're going to have a machlekes in this case too. When he's nullifying his rights in the courtyard, you don't have to nullify your rights to every single person because, like we said, according to Rabbi Eliezer, when a person mevatel, he's ba'ayin yafim mevatel. He does it generously. In other words, we don't say, wait a second, when he said he's not keeping his rights in the courtyard, oh, that's the only thing he specified. Regarding his house, he didn't say anything about his house. No, he says when you nullify your rights in the courtyard, that automatically will include the rights to your house too. So everyone's coming on Shabbos carrying in that of, oh, you left the kugel in your house. How are we going to get it? You weren't part of the Eruv. It's okay, we could carry in and out of your house. You cannot, but we could, because your house was also nullified to us. Oh, so from that you can learn out. When someone goes over to one of the members of the community and he says, "Oi, I forgot to be part of the Eruv. So you know what? I'm being mavatla my reshus to you." Rabbi Lezer would hold he's mavatla to everybody. We don't say no. He only said he's mavatla to him. Whoever he was not mavatla, he's not mavatla to. You don't say that. You say that ba'aynafa mavatla, and therefore he's nullifying it to everybody. Now the Rabban, according to Rabban, no, because mavatla reshus when he's nullifying his domain. So you have to go over and be mavatla to every single person. Because just like regarding his house, the Rabban hold you didn't specify anything about your house, so you didn't nullify your rights to your house. Here also, if you didn't specify that you're nullifying to every single person in that community, so you didn't nullify, and they're all going to be forbidden. Now, Rashi just addressed a question. Although he's nullifying his rights to one of the members, that member has an eruv with everyone else, so shouldn't that make it okay because that guy's like one family with everyone else, and you're nullifying to him? So and that says Rashi no, because if he had regarding the case when you made the eruv the day before, if it was with the intention of that portion that was not part of the eruv, yesterday was not that guy's thing. In other words, the Gemara tells us later on of Ayin Beis, let's say someone in the street dies, and they had a certain house in a certain courtyard, and he had left it in his will to one of the people in that community that he could keep his house. So that was, if it was from before the eruv, so when the eruv was made, it was done with the intention of that guy's house, so then it's not going to make it forbidden. But let's say it was only the guy died after Shabbos started, that actually would make it forbidden because that guy, although he got those rights, it was not included when they had made the eruv, and therefore that wouldn't be considered as one thing. And we'll see that later on Daf Yomi. But essentially, that's the chiddush of Rav Sheshes. But doesn't tell us anything regarding the halacha of the person's house itself. That was implicit in their machlekes. The chiddush was the yisoid hadavar. The yisoid hadavar is telling the principle is regarding the yisei be'en yof mevatel be'en ra mevatel, and that will then tell us regarding a different case. Regarding a case when you have 5 people and he's mevatel to one person, do you say my de gully gully, my de loy gully loy gully? What he said, what he didn't say, he doesn't say. Which had the Rabban hold, or like you say, Rabbi Eliezer, no, even what he didn't say is included because we say whether he's mevatel all the way, and therefore not only will it tell us regarding the halacha of the chatzar and his bias, but it tells us regarding his mevatel one person will include other people too. Now the Gemara just clarifies, says, "Kaman azla hadatanya." According to whom is it going in the brayso that says, "Chamisha shashrin b'chatzar echad." You have 5 people dwelling in one courtyard. V'shachach echad, and then one person begadi didn't join into the eruv. So kishmavatul reshus, when he nullifies his domain, ain't tzarich lavatul reshus kol echad echad. He doesn't have to go to every guy in the community and say, "Oh, mavatul reshus to you, mavatul reshus to you." Says Gemara, "Kaman, who's that like?" What do you mean? That's Rabbi Eliezer, like we said, that he holds ba'an yaf and mavatul. You could do it to one person, that automatically you're going to be doing it to every single person. Now the Gemara just says, Rav Kahana Masni Hachi. This version that we said, that Rav Sheshes had said, Kishatin Tzaloimer, on the words of the Mishnah, and then Rechav and Rav Huna, they were Targamua, they translated to say, well, what's the Chiddush of the Kishatin Tzaloimer? They were learning up from that we could tell you a Chiddush regarding the case of Chamisha Sha'ar B'Chatzer. That's what's going to tell us. But Rav Yomi Masni Hachi, the Gemara just wants to have fidelity to the Messiah. He actually learned that, no, it was Rav Sheshes himself that explicitly was saying this teaching, that it was like this. The question was, according to whom this is how the order was. According to whom did the brayso go? 5 people that were dwelling in one courtyard. One person forgot did not make an eruv when he nullifies his domain. It doesn't have to go over to every single person. That brayso was, the question was posed, who was that like? He says, come on, who's that like? It's Rabbi Eliezer, that he says that when you're mevatel, again, that's just the order how it was. It wasn't that Rav Sheshes said a teaching in regards to halacha, the Mishnah, and then they clarified what's the chiddush in that, and they said it will be regarding halacha of chamisha shur b'chatzar echad. No, it was just a different order. When they had brought up in the yeshiva, the brayso, the question was asked, who's that brayso like? Rav Sheshes said that brayso is going like Rabbi Eliezer, and he had learned it up from the halacha of our Mishnah, where you see ba'ayin yafa, he's mevatel. Now the Gemara continues on this machlekes of Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanim, the following question. Amli Rav Papa Labai says, Li Rabbi Eliezer, that says that when a person mevatel his rights in the chatzar, that automatically we include that he's nullifying the rights of his house, and that's what according to Rabbi Eliezer, other people could carry out of his house, because his house is part of the common area now, which is all singular because everyone had an eruv. So the question is like this: I Amar, let's say the person explicitly says, Loi mevatlina, I'm not nullifying the rights of my house. Do we say that his house is permitted to them or not? So too, the question is the other way. Rabbanan, that they say that generally we do not include his house as part of the bitul. I Amar, let's say he explicitly says, Mivatlina, no, I'm nullifying my rights in my house. My what would the halacha be? Would that include that now they could carry from his house also into the courtyard, not only in the courtyard? Because they had originally said that from his house is off limits. He's nullifying his rights in the courtyard, everyone can carry now in the community, but not from his house. Let's say he says explicitly, yeah, I'm being mavatla my house too. What would the halacha be? So what's the question? So the Gemara explains the two tzaddim. Time in Rabbi Eliezer, you say the reason Rabbi Eliezer is mekshum because he holds. When someone is nullifying his rights in the courtyard, and he has to do that so he doesn't become a problem for everyone to be able to carry. Rishus Beis Bitl is also nullifying his rights in his house. So therefore, therefore this guy who Amar no loyma, he says, I'm not nullifying, so then it's not going to be included. I don't know. Maybe time in Rabbi Eliezer, maybe the reason Rabbi Eliezer is mishum debayis v'lei chatzar, a house without a courtyard, like in this case, where he cannot carry anymore from his house to the courtyard. He's making it forbidden himself because he was nullifying his rights that he has in the courtyard. Everyone else, no one lives in a prison that he can't go and carry out of his house on Shabbos to the courtyard, and therefore, even if he says, I'm not nullifying my rights in the house, lav kol kamine, there's no one that does something like that, which is, since he doesn't have rights in the courtyard, the dwelling in his house is like not a dwelling. And therefore, says the Gemara, Avagav the Amadayarna, even if he says, I want to dwell in my house, lav klum kama, he's not saying anything. Because no one lives in the house that you cannot carry out into the courtyard. And therefore, it's like he has no rights in the house. Even if he's saying he wants to hold into the rights, because it's like batla daite. No one lives in the house that you can't carry into the courtyard. And therefore, automatically, even when he says he's not being batla, it will be included. Because it has nothing to do with his intention. It's that we say that no one can live in a house without a courtyard. And if you're giving up your rights in the courtyard, your rights in the house are automatically given up, even if you say you don't want them, because you gave up your rights in the courtyard, and that automatically is including the house. That's the question over the answer. Rabbanan, what's the question over there? We said, if the guy says, I do want to nullify my rights in the house, what's the halacha going to be? So the Gemara explains here also. Do you say Tamid Rabbanan, the reason of the Rabbanan that they usually hold that you cannot carry from his house is not included in the bittul, because they hold him. If someone gives up his rights in the courtyard, it doesn't mean he's automatically giving up his rights in his house. But Vahai, this guy, says, yeah, I'm giving up my rights. So therefore it would be included. I don't know. Maybe Tamid Rabbanan, maybe the reason Rabbanan is Mishum Deloy, Over Inish, Misalik Nafshi, Legamri, Mibayis, V'chatzer. A guy doesn't usually give up, remove himself totally from his house, from his courtyard, and therefore and to become like a guest by them. He's not going to strip himself of everything he has. I don't want to be like a guest, like the parents who give off properties to their kids. What's the famous the story is basically the guy had 7 kids and he gave his property to 7 of the kids, and every day he would go somewhere else, and then he had no place of his own. A guy doesn't want to give off everything he has because he's leaving him all right. So he'll hold on to something, will be his house. So he'll give up the rights in the court, he's not giving the rights in his house. But this guy who he says, I'm giving up the rights, lav kol kamine, essentially. So here also, it's batlo daite, a person will not give up his rights. Even if he's saying, I don't want to have my house, no, he's only giving up the courtyard because a guy would not, just the same type of story we had in Rabbi Eliezer, the other way by Rabbanan, a guy will not give up everything. Even if we said I'm giving the chassid, no, batlo daite, we're not considering as if it's a bit. So now Amalai, so Abaye said, Papa, he says, Bein Rabbanan, Bein Rabbi Eliezer, keeping the gully daite, once he reveals his intention, gully, he revealed it, so therefore, it's like that option, the first option of we had in the question, that it's something just that depends on what we generally presume. It's not like we're not going to allow it. No, you batla daite or lav kol kamine, we don't say that. It's just that generally when the guy's mavatla his rishus nechatzer, Rabbi Eliezer is ba'ayin yafa, so that automatically includes the bias. According to ba'ayin ra, but if the guy says explicitly, I don't want to be generous, or I do want to be generous, then we would include what he's saying, whether to be a bittul or not to be a bittul. And it's not like the other side we have in the Gemara that no, it can't be lav kol kamine. We don't hold like that. The third teaching and final teaching that Rabbi Eliezer had said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer was v'chein shematim min the I heard from him a third halacha. That you could fulfill your obligation of Mara on Pesach with a krablin. Says Gemara, krablin. So Amr Shlokish says atzvasa charziyasa, which is a thick vine, what Rashi explains, that grows around the palm tree and it wraps itself around, all tied together, and it has like a bitter taste. That's going to be like mud. Whenever I usually say that's how Rashi explains, I'm usually alluding to a sheet of Rishan that usually disagrees with Rashi, like places it says. And now and then in the Mishnah he concludes, he says, and I went to all my students and I looked for someone and I didn't find anyone that had the same asar like I said. Hanlach Pasan, which I'll return to you the second parak of Masechtas Eruvin, parak Pasan, which spoke about that of making pasna, making the boards around the wells, which is like some type of a chiddush inferior, but just for the oil gum to be able to get the water. And then the second half of the parak was talking about karfa, which also is a certain type of inferior type of walls, halachically, where although it's regular fences, but it's for non-residential purpose, and we want to know, we had many different opinions regarding how much can you carry there or not. Now we will start the third parak, b'chol ma'arvin, which, and then we'll resume on the next topic, just to get opening into this parak. The third parak is b'chol ma'arvin. It talks about the laws of tchumen. Tchumen is regarding how far can a person go on Shabbos. He has a limitation of 2,000 amas. However, you can make an eruv tchumen, which is that you could go before Shabbos and you could put food, a meal, as if that's where I'm living for Shabbos, 2,000 amas away from the city, which you can still get to. But then that becomes your new Shabbos residence, and then it's going to be 2,000 amas in any direction from that place where you made it. So that's where our mission is going to start with what and where can you make this eruv. Says the Mishnah, B'kol ma'arvin. With anything could you make the eruv. Now Rashi says that would include even eruv chatzeres, which is making the eruv of the courtyards. There's many different things that are called the eruv. There's eruv tchumen, which everyone agrees that we're talking about here in the Mishnah regarding the place of where you're making with your Shabbos residence, and the eruv chatzeres is like as if you're all one. So you could really make the eruv with any type of food. The mishtatfin is a similar thing to eruv. It's just eruv is for courtyards, and the shetufim avayis is for when you have alleyways, which is a larger area. Which in Talmudic times, houses open up to courtyards open to alleyways, and the alleyways open up into the rishus harabim. So you can take any type of food for your eruv or for your shetufim avayis. Chutz min hamayim and melech. Two exceptions are water and salt, because they don't give sustenance at all. And the reason for the eruv is because your intention and your dwelling is where your food is. And since all the people of the courtyard, they put their food in one house, so it's like as if they're one family living in one house, comes out that they're all one domain. So to eruv tchumen is like as if that's like your Shabbos residence over there, and because that's where your food is, and so from there you have another 2,000 amas in any direction. So you need something to be food, to be mazon, to be sustenance. Salt and water is not considered sustenance, and therefore it's not going to work as an eruv, and therefore it's not valid. Now, once we introduce an exception of water and salt, we talk about other areas halacha that also water and salt is not going to work. You could buy any type of food with your meiser sheni money, which was, let's say a person has produce out of Eretz Yisrael. So he has to give bikurim, he has to give truma, he has to give, with bikurim this week's parasha, I know people like when I reference this week's parasha, truma, meiser rishon, truma goes to the kohen, meiser rishon goes to Levi, meiser sheni is you have to bring up to Yerushalayim. Now if you have too much produce, you sell off the produce, and you take the money and you bring it up to Yerushalayim. Now what could you use the money for? For any type of food, which is, like it says over there, whatever your heart's desire is. Now, but you cannot spend the money on water and salt. The Gemara actually will explain the reasoning is because it's not a pre. We learned that from the pasuk. It has to be a fruit that comes from an original fruit, which that's not what water and salt. They don't come from derived from another source, and therefore it wouldn't be valid. Similarly, if someone takes a vow that he's not going to have any nourishment, so mutter b'melech mayim, he's permitted with salt and water, because again, that's not considered something that's mazon, that's nourishing. That's the first half of the Mishnah regarding what type of food. Now, where can you? And then the Mishnah has one more machlekes regarding what's going to be valid. Ma'arvel a nazir can make an eruv tchumen with beyain, with wine. So although wine's not fit for a nazir because he took a vow to abstain from wine, but it's fit for other people. And since it's considered mezainis for other people, so therefore the Rabbanan permitted him to make for his own eruv tchumen. And Yisrael b'truma. A Yisrael could use truma, where although he cannot eat truma, but fit for the kain. Now Sumchas, he disagrees. He says no b'chulin. A Yisrael could only use chulin, not truma, because it has to be something that's fit for him. Like Gemara is going to explain. So why didn't Sumchas disagree with the case of wine for the nazir? That's also not fit for him. Now this is where it's talking about regarding the place where you could put the eruv. Well, the kain beveis pras. A kain could even put, and this is just an anonymous part of the Mishnah. It's not Sumcha saying it. The kohen can put his eruv even at Beis HaPras. A Beis HaPras, we'll explain the Gemara, is an area where there was a grave that was plowed over. Now we don't know in this whole area if there's maybe a bone of a dead person, which is problematic for a kohen. So, although that you need to be able to have that the kohen or whoever it is that made the eruv should be able to get it, that because if he can't go there, then it cannot be considered as makom shvisa, to be as if he's having a Shabbos residence over there. But by Beis HaPras, it's going to be okay because that's just a rabbinic doubt, and therefore, as the Gemara will tell us, he's allowed to go there when he's blowing. If he's blowing on the ground, in just in case there's a bone that's there on the floor, he could blow and it'll blow it away. So therefore, he's allowed to make that eruv in that Beis HaPras. And Yudam, he says, the Philippine Akfar says you could even make his Eruv in the area of by a cemetery between graves, because he can make a partition between him and the grave that it shouldn't be like he's mal on it, like as if he's leaning over the grave, and to go there and to eat. For example, if let's say he goes there in a carriage and he's there from before Shabbos and he wants to, so therefore it's going to be fit for him, because as Taisa says, if not, then it wouldn't be an Eruv, because although it's fit for Yisrael to go there, but still, as Taisa is explaining, it has to be that you can't have him in one place and the Eruv in another place. It has to be at least in the same place. The food could be fit for someone else, but the Eruv has to be in the same place where you could go. And if he can't go into the cemetery, that's not going to be valid. But it's going to be valid because he can make a machitza and he'll be able to be over there, and therefore that would be a valid way of making the Eruv. Some of this we spoke about in today's Daf, in Eruvin Daf Chavav, was we continued the story of Hia Varnica. He had this gazebo, which Rav Huna had made for the Resh Galusa, sticks, less than 3 tefachim, one from the other, so that it'll be like a path that's made specially. Now Rav went and took it off, and then his students went and took away the sticks that he can't make it again. Next day on Shabbos, then his 3 students came and asked him questions. The first one was from Halacha of Tchumen, which was regarding a new city. What's a new city? Is that it was first fenced in, and then it was ultimately settled. That you see, and that was what we're saying, even if it's Yashva, not even Pischa, which that was one of the things that entertained that Rabbi maybe was saying that it would make it residential. You see, you could only measure from where they settled and not from the wall. So here also it's hopeful to say Yashva, even though they subsequently make this gazebo, it was only after you fenced in that would not make it residential. Second question was from we have halacha that when the construction workers make their walls, it's not considered as a wall because it's there just for privacy. Here also, the walls of the gazebo is not for residential, just for privacy purposes. That's not going to make it in. Now he was going on the case of the avarnik, meaning of the walls of the gazebo itself. That will not make it into residential area because that's not bona fide walls. The third question was from halacha of if it's made for storage. That's not considered as a mechitza. What? Now where do we know that? Because in mechuzah, they made that every neighborhood made its own eruv. Why? Because of these ditches that they had from the pits that they were used for the oxen, which those walls, although it was surrounding the city, the whole city, but they're made really only to protect to storage for the pits of the oxen, and therefore that wasn't considered as a valid mechitza to use as enclosing the whole city to make an eruv. So here also, these walls of the Avarnik was there just for storage. They would keep their talis there in the gazebo. They would put all their stuff. It was like a shed. You put your stuff, and therefore that was not considered a valid mechitza, and therefore that would not make a residential area. So then Rish Galusa says, and these students, he says, chacham heim lahara, like to do bad, they know, and yesterday they take away the sticks. Next day, when I need this thing to make a kiddush over there, then they say, you can't carry anymore in that area. Then we went back to the Mishnah, and Rabbi Shloimy said, the first of his 3 teachings, he said, I heard from Rabbi Eliezer that no, a karfaf, you could go ahead, unlike all the other opinions that limited up until base of sign, it says even a base core, which is 30 saw, 15 times more than everyone else. The Gemara said, our Mishnah is obviously then not like Hananya, because he had said even 40 saw, which a core is 30 saw, and he was saying even 40 saw. So the Gemara says that actually the machlek is from the same source of the pasuk that it's written ha'ir, but actually we read it chatzer, which tells us that their a courtyard is because the backyard of the kings was like almost the size of a medium-sized city, which is a machlekes is a medium-sized city, 30 or 40 saw, and that's going to then be considered as a chatzar, which are karfah that you're permitted to carry according to Rabbi Eliezer. And now, what was Yeshayahu doing there anyways? He was making yeshiva by the entryway, but we said in general one should not do that because it's going to be megari to Sutton. Sutton's going to come, and therefore we don't make yeshiva by the entryway of where a sick Talmid Chacham is. The second halacha, Rabbi Shloimy said from Rabbi Eliezer, is that I also heard that the people of a courtyard, if one of them forgot, he didn't make an eruv, so it's forbidden for him, but for them it's permitted to carry out of his house. Now, Rabbanan, they disagree. We said, that's not difficult, it's actually machlekes. And what we learn out from this is what the Gemara ultimately said is the chiddush of Rav Sheshes. What we could learn out is if you could understand the reasoning of the machlekes, which is regarding if a chatzar, when you reveal regarding the chatzar, does that automatically include the house, which was not said or not? So the relevancy of that, what we call, is it be'ein yafa mevatel or is it be'ein ra mevatel? That principle will relate to if, let's say, one person was mevatel to one of the people. Would that include as if it's nullifying to all of them? That would be based on that principle. Do you say be'ein yafa, even what you didn't mention is included, or what you didn't mention is not included? Now, related to this, the Gemara says, a question according to Rabbi Eliezer. If he explicitly says, no, I don't want mevatel my house, And according to Rabbanim, he explicitly says, I do want to move my house. What's the halacha going to be? So the Gemara ultimately concluded, yes, it depends on whatever he revealed his intention, whether yes or no, according to Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbanim. And that is not, meaning not like the other option that we had said. We had an option in Rabbi Eliezer that says maybe a house in the courtyard. A person does not live in a house that he can't go into the courtyard. And therefore, automatically, it's nullified. Even if he said, I don't want to nullify, we would say, but l'daitei. That was the other option the Gemara had. And according to Rabbanim, we also had a similar type of option, which a person is not going to remove himself totally from his area. And when he says mabatlina, then we say that no, it's batla daitai, and we're going to say that that's not going to be batla. And then we say no, it's not like that. It depends on whatever he reveals his intention. Then we said from the Mishnah, he says the third halacha was I also heard from him that you could fulfill your obligation by krabbin on Pesach, which the Gemara explained, which Rashi says, and that's usually when I do yellow, it's Rashi. Sometimes, or just added commentary, is there was a thick part of the vine of the date palm which grows around, has a bitter taste. That's going to be considered like mar. And this is a courtesy of my daughter. We should return to the second parak in Masechtas Eruvin parak Eisen Pasan. Then we began the third parak B'chol Ma'arvin, which talks about that of Eruvin Techumen, that of you can make an Eruv, which Rashi says that Eruvin Chatzeres and Eruvin Techumen, and do a Shetufim Avayis with everything except for Mayim and Melech. That's not considered as sustenance. Now, similarly, this except of Mayim and Melech, we had in a few different halachas too. Regarding Kesef Ma'is, you can't buy Mayim and Melech. And also, if you're making a neder from something that's sustaining, you also can be permitted with Mayim and Melech. Then we said you could even make Eruv for a Nazir with wine, because I will explain the Gemara why that actually is according to everyone. But Machlekes regarding Yisrael, could he make it with Truma or not? Does it have to be fit for him, which is not? Or since it's fit for the Kohen, it's still considered a viable food, and he can make it with that too. And then we said regarding the place of where could you make it, the Chiddush is, even for a Kohen based on Pras, because although rabbinically it's forbidden for him, but he could blow and then it's going to be permitted, so he can make it over there. And he says even in a cemetery, because he can make some type of mechitza and he could go over there, and therefore not going to be a problem of oil, and therefore it won't be considered hu b'mokum echad ve'hu b'mokum acher. It will be permitted to make an error over there. Thank you to any time for hosting us.